protected at every stage. He sits before this court presumed innocent, and that presumption remains unless and until each element of every offense charged against him is proved beyond a reasonable doubt. At the same time, and as applicable, victims are entitled under our Constitution to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity, free from harassment or abuse. Justice demands that both of these principles, the rights of the accused and the rights of victims, be honored without compromise. I remain steadfast in my oath that I made 56 days ago to support and defend the constitutions of the United States and of Utah. I will carry out my duties with fidelity, transparency, and impartiality, treating every person who appears before me with the dignity.
The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and in that instant, the buzzing whispers inside the courtroom died down. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a pin drop, or the faint echo of someone shifting nervously in their chair. Reporters stopped typing. Families held their breath. Even the judge, stern and unmoving, looked up with sharper eyes. And then, he walked in. Charlie Kirk's accused killer, shackled at the wrists, escorted by 2 officers. Every step he took seemed heavier than the last, the chains rattling softly like a grim reminder of why everyone was here. Some people stared at him with anger. Others looked away, not wanting to face the man tied to such a tragedy. You could feel the tension. It wasn't just in the air, it was pressing down on everyone, like the weight of judgment itself was in the room. Then, suddenly, movement from the second row. His parents stood up. Slowly, hesitantly. They weren't just standing as spectators anymore, they were standing as broken mother and father, about to bare their souls. Their faces told the story before they even opened their mouths. His mother's eyes were red and swollen, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue, knuckles white. His father stood rigid, jaw tight, but you could see it, the pain etched into every line of his face. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't denial. It was grief. Pure, desperate grief. And in that silent courtroom, everyone knew something unforgettable was about to be said. She took a shaky step forward, clutching a crumpled tissue in one hand. Her voice cracked before she even formed the words. You could see her lips trembling, her chest rising and falling as if every breath was a battle. And then she spoke, soft, broken, but loud enough to pierce the silence. Please, don't give my son the death penalty. The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing far louder than her fragile voice ever could. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. The victim's family sat frozen, their grief colliding with this new plea. The attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the judge, who had maintained a stone-cold expression all morning, blinked slowly, as if the weight of her words had landed squarely on him. You could actually see people struggling to process it. A mother wasn't defending her son's actions. She wasn't excusing the crime. She was just begging to keep her child alive. Tears streamed down her face, unchecked, falling onto the polished wooden floor. Each one seemed to hit with the sound of a hammer strike. And in that moment, the trial no longer felt like a battle of law, evidence, and punishment. It had transformed into something else, something painfully human. It wasn't about statutes and verdicts anymore. It was about life, death, and the desperate love of a mother who couldn't bear to lose her child, no matter what he had done. The courtroom wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a place drenched in raw human. The mother's words were still hanging in the air when he stood up. At first, he didn't move quickly. He placed his hand gently on his wife's shoulder, almost steadying her, as if to take the burden of her grief onto himself. Then he stepped forward. He was a tall man, but in that moment, he looked smaller. The kind of smallness that doesn't come from height, but from years of carrying something too heavy for one heart to bear. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, knuckles white, the veins in his arms strained. His eyes, red-rimmed, weary, but determined, locked on the judge. The entire room seemed to hold its breath again. You could almost hear the echo of his footsteps as he moved. The faint creak of the wooden floor beneath his shoes seemed louder than anything else. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It carried in that way where you don't need volume, because the weight of the words themselves demands silence. He said. He turned himself in, "Please don't take his life." The words didn't just fall into the room, they cracked it open. I swear, you could hear the reaction ripple through the courtroom. A few gasps. A sharp exhale from someone in the back row. The victim's family stiffened, their grief hardened instantly. Some shook their heads in disbelief, as if the plea itself was offensive. A murmur started, then stopped, as if people didn't know whether it was appropriate to respond at all. But me? Sitting there, watching. I just froze. That line hit me harder than I expected. He turned himself in. It was as if the father was trying to remind the judge, the jury, the world, that his son, despite everything, had chosen not to run. That somewhere inside him, there was still a trace of conscience, of humanity. And then came the second half, "Please don't take his life." That wasn't a legal argument. It wasn't a carefully crafted defense. It was a father's heart laid bare in front of strangers, in front of the law, in front of the people who had every reason to hate his child. You could see the pain in his face. Every wrinkle seemed to tell a story of nights spent awake, wondering where he went wrong. Of years raising a boy, never imagining this day would come. Of wishing he could trade places, just so his son wouldn't have to stand there with his fate dangling in the hands of a judge. His voice cracked once. He paused, closed his eyes for a second, and swallowed hard before continuing. He didn't add much more, because really, what else was there to say? His plea had been made. His soul had been placed on the table, vulnerable and trembling. The silence that followed wasn't the same silence from before. Earlier, it had been tense, expectant. Now, it was heavy. Suffocating. I looked around. Some people were stone-faced, unmoved, holding tightly to the idea of justice through punishment. Others looked conflicted, their eyes darting between the grieving parents of the killer and the grieving family of the victim. Two worlds of pain, colliding right there in front of us, with no solution that could ever heal both. And that's when the thought hit me, how do you even judge this kind of pain? Because what is justice in a moment like this? Is it the law? Is it balance? Is it taking a life for a life? Or is it recognizing that no matter what the court decides, two families are already destroyed? I sat there, struggling. Part of me wanted to side with the victim's family, because yes, their pain deserves justice. But another part of me couldn't ignore the sight of that father, voice breaking, begging not for freedom, not for forgiveness, but just for mercy. It wasn't about innocence anymore. It wasn't about guilt. That had already been established. It was about the simple, heartbreaking plea of a man who just didn't want to bury his child. And in that room, you could feel that conflict weighing on everyone. The judge looked down, expression unreadable. The lawyers avoided eye contact. The families on both sides sat like statues, their pain carved into their faces. That moment, it wasn't just part of a trial. It was something bigger. It was a raw confrontation with the limits of justice itself. Because sometimes, the law can give you an answer. But it can't tell you if that answer will heal anyone. And that's what haunted me as I sat there, not the crime, not even the punishment, but the echo of those words. He turned himself in, "Please don't take his life." Words that, no matter what verdict comes, will stay with me forever. On one side of the room sat the victim's family. Their faces were heavy with sorrow, but beneath the sorrow burned something sharper, anger. You could see it in the way the victim's brother's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists on his knees. You could see it in the mother's eyes, fixed on the killer with a look that could cut through stone. To them, justice wasn't an abstract idea. Justice was the only thing left to hold on to. For weeks, months, they had been waiting for this moment. They wanted to hear the word guilty. They wanted to see the system affirm what they already knew, that their loved one's death mattered, that it would not go unanswered. And for many of them, the death penalty wasn't about cruelty. It was about closure. In their minds, how could there be peace if the one who caused all this pain continued to breathe? But directly across from them, another family was breaking apart. The killer's parents sat together, hands locked tightly as if letting go would mean losing their son forever. Their grief wasn't born from losing someone, they still had their child, physically alive, but from the unbearable fear that soon, the state would take him away. To them, every second of this trial was like sand running through an hourglass, leading to a moment they prayed would never come. Their son was guilty. They knew it. The world knew it. But what they couldn't accept was the idea of watching him die by law. No parent raises a child thinking that one day they'll be begging a judge to spare his life. And yet here they were, voices trembling, hearts exposed, pleading for mercy in front of strangers who might see their love as weakness, or worse, as disrespect to the victim's memory. And there, in that courtroom, these two families weren't just separated by rows of wooden benches. They were separated by worlds. One world demanded justice through punishment. The other begged for mercy through life. Two worlds of grief, both valid, both real, colliding in a space where only one decision could be made. The air grew heavier with every passing second. You could feel the invisible wall between the families, the way one side saw the other's tears not as tragedy, but as insult. To the victim's family, the killer's parents seemed to be asking for compassion their own child had not shown. To the killer's parents, the victim's family's call for death felt like a second execution, this time of their own child. It was a collision of pain with no middle ground. No verdict could undo what had happened. No sentence could satisfy both sides. And yet, in that courtroom, the judge would eventually be forced to choose. For the rest of us watching, it was impossible not to feel torn. To look at the victim's family and say, yes, they deserve justice. And then to turn your head, see the killer's parents in tears, and whisper to yourself, but do they deserve this much loss too? That's when it became clear, this wasn't just a trial. It was a tragedy on both sides. I don't know. I'm honestly shaken. I walked into that courtroom expecting to see a legal process, evidence, witnesses, arguments, verdicts. But what I saw, what I felt, was something entirely different. Because in those moments, when a mother begged for her son's life, when a father's voice cracked as he pleaded for mercy, and when the victim's family sat frozen with grief and fury, this wasn't about law anymore. It was about humanity colliding with humanity. And the question that keeps echoing in my head is simple, but unbearable: should justice mean death? For some, the answer is yes. For the victim's family, death is the only punishment that feels equal to what was taken from them. They lost someone they loved, forever. A son, a daughter, a brother, a friend. No amount of prison time can bring that person back. To them, the death penalty feels like balance. An eye for an eye. But then, there's that other voice, the father's plea. He turned himself in. Those words haunt me. Because what does that mean? Does it mean he felt guilt? That some sliver of conscience survived? That deep down, he knew he couldn't run from the truth? If justice is about accountability, doesn't turning yourself in say something about accountability? Or, is it too little, too late? I don't have an answer. And maybe that's the hardest part. Because this isn't just a case anymore. This isn't just about one crime, one courtroom, one verdict. This is a question about life, about forgiveness, about whether mercy has a place in justice, or whether justice demands its pound of flesh no matter what. Look, laws are written in black and white. Guilty or not guilty. Life sentence or death penalty. But sitting in that courtroom, watching two families destroyed in two very different ways, nothing felt black and white. It was all gray. Heavy, suffocating gray. I kept staring at the parents on both sides. One family begging for punishment, the other begging for mercy. Both families already broken beyond repair. And I thought to myself, when this verdict comes, someone will walk out of this room feeling like the system failed them. Someone will walk out more shattered than they already are. And maybe that's the truth about justice. Maybe it's not about healing. Maybe it never was. Maybe it's just about deciding whose pain will weigh heavier in the eyes of the law. But here's what I can't stop thinking, when the judge finally speaks, when the sentence is handed down, it won't erase the crime. It won't bring back the dead. It won't stop two parents from crying themselves to sleep at night. It won't give the other family their child back. So then, what does justice really look like? Is it the silence of a man executed? Or the silence of a man locked away forever, left to live with what he's done? I don't know. And maybe none of us do.